Testing, 1, 2. Here we go. Do I have to lean over? All right, bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalat wassalamu ala rasulillah. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. I love the GTA, and I love the people that I've met here. You have a lot of exciting things going on, and it really is an honor, talking about working together with I3, working together with folks like Muhammad Hijab and Abdullah Andalusi and Sheikh Usta. One thing that many Muslims have reflected upon in the last 2 weeks as things continue to escalate in Palestine, may Allah grant them victory, is that some things feel different, right? Like this time maybe, inshallah, it feels different when it comes to the resistance, when it comes to our capacity, when it comes to the interruptions we're making discursively in how things are being represented. But I had this feeling like things are starting to feel different even before when it comes to the dawah sphere, when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to trying to build institutions. And so there's a lot to be excited about, I think, and a lot to look forward to. A whole bunch of people reached out to me individually and told me not to come here. They told me I3 is a front for HT and all this stuff. And I responded to them that you guys have this 1990s mentality. This is not how we're going to come together as an ummah. And Abdullah Andalusi, he put it so well when he said that we need a space for conversations with neither whip nor sword, right? This is how it has to be, right? If we're going to move forward together, we have to plan on differences. We have to expect differences. But that is not a mani'. That's not something that would prevent or prohibit. It's not a prohibitive factor for us getting together, talking about things, trying to move the conversation forward, advance it, and then unite in any way possible. So when Adnan reached out to me and he's like, hey, you want to come up to Toronto to talk about, to join our conference? And I was like, well, what's your conference about? And he said, secularism. And I immediately was like that meme of the guy hiding behind the tree rubbing his hands. I was like, oh, really? So I said back to him, I said, well, yeah, I could talk about secularism literally all weekend. Like, be more specific. What do you want to talk about? And so we sort of ideated on that, what to talk about. And one of the things that he offered me was something that was more difficult and challenging, and I kind of chose that. So you guys are getting something that is different from a lot of the talks that I give. I talk obviously a lot about secularism, been with Paul Williams. We talk about statecraft. We talked about the modern conception of the state, even education. Last night I was shouting over the people eating dinner, and they were talking about Islamic education. These are things that I've thought a lot about and talked a lot about, and so my presentations are very confident and bold and confrontational. This is going to be a little bit different. This is a little bit more exploratory. My conclusions here are a little bit more tentative, right? But a lot of the things that I'm trying to hit on are conversations that I don't really see happening a whole lot. The title that I was given was Undoing Secular Conditioning, right? That's obvious. Reasserting the Divine in Family and Society. Okay, so family and society, there's a lot there, right? I want to start by thinking about one group that fascinates me, and I believe that you have large communities in Ontario of the Amish, is that correct? Pennsylvania Dutch, as they go by different names. Okay, so also in New York, central New York, near Utica, there are significant populations of Amish. Down further in Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, there are also large populations. And the Amish fascinate me, and they fascinate me for several reasons. Not just because their beards are, tip-top shape, not just because the women have a sort of hijab, but they make decisions in a very principled and moral way. And I was actually doing some research on the Amish. And there's only a couple things that are complete kufr, for the Amish, when it comes to technology. A lot of people don't know this, that there's actually a fair bit of autonomy when it comes from community to community. There's a fair bit of wiggle room that they have to actually make decisions locally. But there's two things that are absolute red lines. If you want to be Amish, as far as technology goes, you cannot compromise on. And one of those is the car. Okay, this is probably pretty familiar. You see them with their awesome horse and buggies, right? They look really cool. Unfortunately, they are often casualties sometimes on the road because of the way people drive, which is another topic entirely. But does anybody know why they care so much about the car? I'm going to be a little interactive. I do teach. No. It's actually not about vicinity and the ability to travel, directly at least. Yes. Okay. So the reason that the Amish rejected the car as a technology is that they looked at, by the way, you know what the Amish call everybody else who's not Amish? They call them the English. Yeah. So all of you, they don't care what your skin color is. Like, you're the English. We're the English. Okay. And so they actually let the English adopt a technology, and then they wait and see. What's the effect going to be? And then, do we want to take it on or not? Okay? So they looked at the car, and they said, you know what? What's going to happen if we adopt the car? If we adopt the car, let's say I'm at home, I'm making some shawarma or some cookies or something, and I run out of something, okay? Instead of going to my neighbor to ask them to borrow something, I'm going to go to the grocery store instead. And they said that single intervention in our community will disrupt everything that we're about. We are about relying on each other. We're about sort of existing more on a gift economy. We have these different principles and values, and so this can't happen. It would be the end of us. Now, we don't necessarily have to agree with that particular decision, right? Like, cars are, I drive a lot, and I depend heavily on a car. But the level of intentionality behind the decision that they made, okay, the principles that they're willing to actually take so seriously that they're going to ram every single technology that comes down the pipeline through this sort of matrix and this decision-making contingency plan, I think is enormously instructive. Everything is a moral decision for them. Everything is a moral decision for them. And that is why they are one of the groups that has most successfully resisted modernity and secularism that exists. I don't know of any other group that has more successfully resisted the fragmenting forces, we'll talk about in a second, the fragmenting forces of both secularism and modernity. Do you see sometimes, have you ever seen the Amish construct a barn? If somebody's barn burns down, falls down, gets hit by a tornado, a tree falls on it, the entire community comes together and raises a barn together in a matter of hours. It's a phenomenal, amazing thing to see. When it comes to loans, they never have to take out money. They buy property, just like you and I buy property, cash in hand, but they never take out loans from anyone other than themselves. They're extremely self-sufficient and independent. So, why are they winning? In my estimation, my calculus, why do I say that they're the most successful, like when it comes to resisting modernity? Okay, there's all these things, they're nice. But somebody could say, okay, you guys are stuck in the whatever century and you guys are never going to succeed or go anywhere. Here's my metric of success, okay? Do you know that the Amish, they actually allow their youth to choose. Once they reach, I think it's like 16 to 19, they have a time where they call the Rummenspringa, which is basically the Amish there's a couple of reality shows about this, where they let their young go and live among the English, party out, wild out, be crazy, whatever, taste life in secular modernity, and then by the time they reach the age of 19, they have to decide. Either you're going to stay with us and you're going to leave all that behind, or you go and it's kofar, see you later. We're not going to see you again. Cut off ties. Somebody tell me what's the retention rate of the Amish? Guess. 95, you read the study, 95%. 95% retention rate. You grow human beings in a particular environment. You show them something better, you give them something better. And then when they have a strong foundation, okay, you let them taste society. You let them see what everybody else is doing. And 95% of them choose to go back. I think that is the most significant metric of success. And I think that we have a lot to learn from this type of thinking. As I said, secular modernity is a fragmenting force. That means that it takes things that are whole and it breaks them up into pieces, okay? The first thing that it does is it does that to our deen, okay? Abdullah Andalusi was just talking about it. Our deen is something that is a holistic way of life. It's a comprehensive system. It's a worldview. It's a lens, okay? And the first thing that secularism does is it comes and it breaks it into private worship, personal piety, individual relationship with a creator, a set of propositions that you kind of think are true or not. The disgusting part is that secularism actually has to invent the categories so that it can do its work of fragmentation, okay? So if you want a really good book to read The Myth of Religious Violence by William Kavanaugh. He does a really good job of demonstrating how even the idea of religion is something that was necessarily invented by secularism in order to cut up deen, okay, and make it fit into a box that is stripped of all these other things when it comes to all the other spheres that we conceive of as separate: economy, politics, right, family, all these things that we're used to thinking of. Yes, we put them on a table. Here's religion, here's politics, here's economy, right? And then the kuffar are going to tell us that, well, religion shouldn't be involved in politics. These two things are separate. Well, they had to invent the category of politics and define it in such a way that it excluded faith, invent the category of religion, define it in such a way so that it wasn't obviously tied up in politics in the first place, so that they are even separatable, okay? Islam isn't like that, okay? A deen isn't like that. Something that's a comprehensive way of life isn't like that. It's actually a unicity. It's actually a whole that is not meant to be broken up. That's the secular move. That's my TED Talk, okay? Anybody follow my stuff from before? This is what I rant and rave about all the time. But there's other things that are going on, and there's other sites of fragmentation, okay? And today's talk is exploring the ways in which secularism fragments the family, okay? Which is a little bit different, and it's a little bit new even for me. Women's suffrage, good thing or bad thing? Let's see how controversial we can be today. Raise your hand if you're against women's suffrage. Let's see. Oh, mashallah, I see some sisters back there. Allahu Akbar. Okay, I'm not trying I should have everybody close their eyes so that nobody felt isolated. So this is one of the great myths, and this is a really important sort of historical point, that modern feminism, and I really wish I could go to the talk that's going on simultaneously. Women's suffrage is the right for women to vote. Raise your hand if you think women should not vote. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Okay, now I bring I bring this up. It's actually an extremely important demonstration of how ideology makes narrative out of history. Okay, history is one thing, and historical narrative is a separate thing. So, the feminist movement, right? They in their own self-description, starts with women's suffrage, right? First wave feminism, second wave. We're very uncritical of this sort of self-mythology that feminism presents of itself. Starts with the right to vote. What kind of jerk would reject the right for women to vote? There were women at the time that were against women's suffrage. And it's very interesting if you go into the arguments and see why they were against women's suffrage. Can anybody aware, why would any woman complain about being extended the right to vote? No, not yet. That happened later, drafting the army. Allah. Before women's suffrage, the base unit of society was not the individual, it was the family. The US government, I can't speak for Canada, sorry, used to keep track of statistics by families, and the man was considered the head of the household, and he was a representative, the public-facing membrane of the family. And the women that were against the suffrage movement, who are completely lost to history in the wake of sort of feminist ideology and their own self-mythologizing, right, is that they did not want to be counted as individuals. They wanted to be counted as families. This is how secularism starts to break us apart as families. What's the default assumed sort of subjectivity? What's the smallest common denominator? What's the basic unit of society? A society that's basic unit is a family is very, very different. Very, very different from a society whose basic unit is the individual. The interesting thing is that society and secularism, because of its sort of philosophical background, it has a certain normative individual and societal plan, okay, that it wants to advance, and then it kind of has to reverse engineer it. So it has to produce the subjectivities that are going to want to comport and adhere to its plan for society, all right? So how are we going to get people to want to be counted as individuals, right? That's kind of the work of what normal people call political science these days. So let's think about it, okay? There are ideal forms. Let's look at how and why we're doing this is because it's going to illustrate the ways that secularism has fragmented the family. And it's going to be extremely relevant, obviously, as Muslims. What are all the characteristics of the ideal normative family under secularism? Just throw out some characteristics. Huh? Equality. Okay, so that looks like what? Duh. I mean, like chores, right? Splitting chore. We're talking like sameness of roles or parity of roles, right? Dual income household, right? Both of them working, having careers, having educations. What else? Okay, we're getting there. We're getting that goes into motivations, but we're just focusing on the characteristics at first. What is the dream that you've been sold? Think about, okay, so how do they achieve this? Okay, movies, books, etc. What is the ideal normative family structure, and what are its characteristics within secular modernity? Equality between spouses, home ownership. Well, let's complicate that a little bit. Big mortgage and debt, right? A little bit different, yeah?
Independence.
What type of independence? Independence from whom?
Financial.
The husband. The husband is financially independent? Okay. Each individual has a degree of financial independence. Anyone from the ladies' side? How? Autonomy.
Well, you should make your own decisions.
Okay, making your own decisions. Okay, yeah. Ah, very good. Nuclear. Hello. Nuclear families, right? Not extended families. No aunts, no cousins, no grandparents, right? This is the ideal family that you're sold. Okay? Nobody said it yet. What else? Individualist mindset, that's part of it, yes. Huh? Not a lot of kids, right? That's too expensive, and it cramps our sort of expected standard of living. Not going to have as much Netflix and going out to eat if we have too many kids.
Other than husband, wife, male, female, parents, and households, and
Aywa.
LGBTQ+,
Aywa. Okay, there's that. Man, none of you, guys, come on, especially the men. Come on, guys. Every dude talk comes back to what if you're between 20 and 25? Huh? Okay, that's there. There's no authority because we're equal. You can't have authority if you're equal. Bro. Polygamy. Polygamy. Okay, thank you. Come on, guys. The normative family is a nuclear monogamous family, right? Right. Okay, everybody's having sex. Don't worry about that. Okay? So this is the dream that's sold to you. Okay, no problem. No comment yet. We're just describing. Okay, but there's a reverse engineering process by which we are filled with desires for this type of lifestyle and that type of family. When you think about what's my wedding going to look like and what's my house going to look like, and you start to daydream and you're feeling heady, you just fell in love, right? Like these are the things that come to mind. Those images didn't come from nowhere. They didn't come from nowhere. They actually came from a particular desirable outcome that your culture and society maintained by the state. It's not crude. Like the state's not just like telling everybody what to say in the media, but they're the referee. You know what I mean? Like if UFC, right? Who won earlier?
All of them.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. So you see how the referee, he ensures that it's a fair fight. Anything that happens outside what the referee wants to have happen, then he jumps in. Okay? So the state here is like referee. They're not actually doing the fighting all the time, but they'll jump in if something goes out of bounds. Okay? Oh, we're going to run out of time. Okay. So you're starting to see the ways that secularism fragments a family, or at least it has a very, very specific idea of what a family should look like. And we can now have a critical assessment whether that actually jives with what a normative Islamic family should or should not look like. Okay? So this is what we're doing. We're trying to take away the normativity, bring it into the realm of just being descriptive. Something that this is how it is. It's one way of doing things. It might have some advantages, but it might also have some vulnerabilities and drawbacks. Yes. Some authors have written about a concept, and for those of you whose families have migrated more recently, this should still be within living memory. Someone brought up individualism. Individualism is a key ideological component to help us get here. How do you think about yourself moving through life? Do you imagine yourself as an individual who's on this sort of journey of self-discovery. You go to college, you major, you follow your heart and do what the Disney movies tell you. Then you fall in love, you just, bump into somebody, and you fall in love at first sight, and then et cetera, et cetera. Or another model is the idea of what it's called a family corporation, right? Like, for example, my family came to North America in 1905 from Italy, okay? My grandfather was one of 13 children. They all were different specialties, like, carpenters and coal miners and this and that and the other, and they all had a very collective mindset. And many of you whose parents migrated, or maybe your grandparents migrated, you also know that within those types of families, individualism was not sort of what was going on. It was a much more collective mindset. The family was thought of as a corporation. The oldest child usually got the most education, usually even bankrolled the education of those that were younger than it. There was a collective type of thinking that's not present in the normative sort of family structure that you're fed today. So the forces of secular modernity try to break all this up for reasons. We got into motives, like why would they want to do this? Okay, yeah, taxes. They would love to tax incomes. They want people to have huge mortgages. They want people to be in debt. They want people to, we'll get there. Yes, they want people to have a certain expectation of life. What's the dream life? When did you make it, right? What do all of our parents probably want for us? Or at least, what do they want for you? They want you to be a doctor and have a house in the suburbs with a white picket fence, right? That's why they send you to what I call the Holy Trinity. You can either be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, right? That's the Holy Trinity for Muslims, unfortunately. The idea, what's behind it, is because there's a certain expected lifestyle that's attached to, and status and honor and all these sorts of things, okay? The state is very happy to push that on us, through its various sort of things that it allows culturally, movies, et cetera, sets the tone for gender roles, the abolition of authority, right? The sameness with which women are treated as men, okay, which they call equality, but I'll call it something a little bit more descriptive. I think calling it equality is a little bit ideological. I think sameness is a more accurate description of sort of what's going on, so that they can keep you in debt, have you own very little, because usually it's mortgage and on credit. Now you have to give them your kids to educate them, right? You have to go to work, your wife has to go to work. You have to afford the lifestyle. And so your kids are now educated by the state. Look at how that's a vulnerability with the LGBTQ nonsense. Can I say that in Canada? Are they going to arrest me? I'm good? Because in America, I go off. Okay. And even, yes, monogamy. Okay. Any Talal Asad fans, he actually talks about this in a footnote in Formations of the Secular. I'll let you explore that. But he talks about how the nation state is actually, what's the word that he uses? It's dependent upon a certain ideology of monogamy that is very new. It's actually new. It's very modern. The idea of this nuclear family. Anyway, that's an aside. I don't want to get into that. Another stream of fracturing that we're under. So you see how now the family is getting broken up, right? What came from a non-secular, or at least a less secular place, a less modern place, as a family corporation with different sort of with hierarchy, with authority, with differentiation, with mutual dependence, with all these sort of interesting things going on. You're ran through the matrix of modernity and secularism, and you're kind of getting broken down. Another key ingredient in that process is actually urbanization. That's one that nobody talks about because everybody loves to live in cities, as all of you do. In 2007, okay, was the first time in history that more people in the world lived in urban centers than in rural places, okay? So very, very recently. The speed, the breakneck speed with which the world has been urbanized is something that is very recent, very new. It's a big social experiment. We don't know how it's going to turn out. Okay, the United States, for example, in 1920, it was about 50-50, urban versus rural population. Now, over 80% of the US population lives in urban centers. Turkey is a very dramatic example of this. If any of you guys watch Turkish movies or Turkish serials, this is actually a common theme, like in Babam ve Oğlu and Oğlum and Yumurta and different movies like this. In 1960, 30% of the Turkish population lived in urban centers. I mean, 70% rural in 1960. Fast forward to today, it's also nearly 80%. So these are dramatic shifts, and they're actually really structurally important to achieving all of these fragmentations that we're talking about. The types of family corporations, the types of affordability of land, the types of independence and self-sufficiency that you can have in an urban center where things are crazily expensive is very, very different than if you're outside of an urban center. Okay, we talked about that. A side point, okay. Part of the urbanization, it serves obviously industrialization and the sort of capitalist logic that filled the vacuum after Dean was removed structurally from sort of what Western society was supposed to be about. So the industrial logic wants all of us to be fungible. You know what fungible means, econ guys, right? It's like everything is like it's substitutable, okay? Everyone is just like the other, like pennies or like dollars, okay? So one of the tenets of capitalism and also industrialization is that every single one of us is fungible. That's part of the reason why there's a push for sameness between the genders, why we don't want to differentiate, why we don't want hierarchy, we don't want authority, because then each cog in the system is less substitutable for every other cog. The biggest lie that you've probably ever been sold is that all of these changes lead to freedom or a better lifestyle. Like I think that's just a joke and an ideological sort of statement. In reality, if we're to be sober about it, there are new patterns of dependence and independence that are forged by this type of fracturing. I'll just run through a few of them because I think we're actually getting close to the end of time here. When we talk about independence, what are the types of independence? Like one of the brothers said it. Well, we have more independence. And I asked what? Independence from whom or from what? What type of independence are we talking about? We see that spouses are less dependent upon each other, right? And we see this reflected in the attitudes with which both genders come together when it's time for marriage. Okay, girls are told, get your education just in case, right? Planning for failure. Meher is sky high because in case. Okay, now there might be particular situations, I'm not making fatwa here, where that's religiously acceptable, but I'm talking about ideologically and paradigmatically, right? These are indicators of something else going on. Each spouse lives more independent of the other. Like they're much more easily separatable in one way. Okay, there's other ways in which that's actually the opposite, but we'll talk about that later. Siblings are very, very independent from each other, spread out, as one of the brothers said. Yeah, you've got somebody over here, my one sibling's in California, my other sibling's in Toronto, my other sibling is in Florida, and we FaceTime, right? That's very, very common in this contemporary modern secular world, and that's not by accident. Like, this is part of the fragmenting of the family and what it should be. Parents, you're more independent from your parents, right? To live with your in-laws, let alone your own parents, is seen as aib. It's like, shame. It's something that is avoidable. You want to avoid it at all costs. And we're constantly fed sort of cultural messages within media and et cetera about how undesirable this thing is, how oppressive this thing is, so that it's become normalized for us to just want to always escape and be free from it. Extended family, same thing. Even our own children, okay? Again, surrendering your child to daycare from a very early age, surrendering them to the state to educate them or brainwash them, as the case may be, all these sort of extracurricular activities, there's independence of parents from their own children. What else do we have? We're also more independent in the sense that we have a life of leisure. This is part of the goods that capitalism sort of promises people in the urban centers that go through this progress of fragmentation. What do you get in return? Really, it's supposed to be a high quality of life, leisure time, consumer goods. 5 minutes? Allahu Akbar. All right. Fast forward, hyperspeed. Okay. You're free from having to work with your hands. You're free from having to make anything yourself. You're free from even having to undergo the training to know how to make anything yourself or fix anything yourself or do anything yourself, which is why there's a large de-skilling of society, which there's books about that. You can read about that elsewhere. But it's not just about independence. Actually, the new regime actually has a lot of dependence that's built into it too. We don't make our own food. We don't educate our own children. We don't actually own as much as we think we do after credit and mortgage is taken into account. We can't make things for ourselves. Therefore, we are not self-sufficient. Remember when the oil embargo happened in the 70s, what did the king of Saudi Arabia say, threateningly? He said, we'll go back to dates and water if we have to. That's power, right? To have the ability to produce for yourself is to not be able to be messed with by anybody else. We can't satisfy all of our needs as a community. Again, we've got the Holy Trinity. We've got tons of doctors on lock, engineers, no problem. But who's going to write poetry? Who's going to write curriculum? We saw this with the LGBTQ phenomenon. All of a sudden, Muslims are on the backpedaling. Who's going to write the curriculums? Who in this, raise your hand if you're an education major. I hope there's one in the room. Is there one in the room? Education? Anybody? No? Nobody in this room does education? Aib, one person. Yeah, Ismail, my man. Right? Good. You're not in college yet, are you? But the idea is, this is not collective thinking. This is not collective thinking. We're being fed individualism, okay? Like you and you and you and you. What are you going to do for your life? We're not thinking as an ummah. We're not thinking about it as a Muslim community. If we're going to have all of our bases covered, we need diversity. We need everybody to have all the skills covered. Is it viable? La ilaha illallah. Is it viable to have a community in this way? Last night, we had somebody say that their first encounter with someone in Canada at a gas station was that your third generation belongs to us, or your third generation will be ours. If this is how assimilation happens, all the things that I've been pointing out, how the fracturing of the family and the breaking up and the feeding you dreams and the dreams that you imagine for yourself that aren't your own dreams. They're not your own dreams. They were fed to you. Okay, this is how assimilation happens. It's not sustainable. It's not viable. In 3 generations, if these are our dreams, we will not be Muslims, or maybe your children or your grandchildren will not be Muslims. Okay? That's the rub, and that's the urgency. If we look at the Sharia, okay, which unfortunately I've got 3 minutes to talk about the light at the end of the tunnel, or the redemption. The Sharia is not merely descriptive, it's also normative. People, you can see this in the inheritance issue. People come to the inheritance issue and they say, oh my God, there's some situations where women inherit less than men. And the assumption is all the assumptions about the dream life and the fractured family that I've already talked about, the individualism. We imagine sister coming in from California, brother flying in from New York. Each of them gets their bag of cash and heads back to their home, independent, free from each other, no relationship, etc. The Sharia is telling you, when it's telling you that a brother and sister do not inherit the same, that a brother inherits twice as much as the sister, that's a normative claim. Allah is teaching you what a relationship should look like. Allah is teaching you what a sibling relationship should look like. The relationship between a brother and sister should be thicker than that. You, brother, are responsible for your sister financially. You're her last resort. If your father dies, and God forbid she's divorced or something happens to her, you are responsible, right? This is how the Sharia is trying to teach you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to teach you what a relationship should look like, what a family should look like, what society should look like. It's not arbitrary. It's not just descriptive. We don't just say, oh, let's reform it now that everybody's individualistic. No, Allah is telling you what it should be. Man, we don't have enough time. The same goes for marriage. The same goes for marriage. Differentiation, okay? Gender roles. The ability to depend upon each other and rely upon each other. There is such a thing, I believe, as sacred dependence. You can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your dependence. All of us are afraid of being dependent on another believer, and yet the Prophet ﷺ said that marriage is half your deen. That means you're incomplete until you get the other half. That means you have to rely on the other half to achieve something that's greater than the sum of its parts. Segregated spaces, gender segregation, right? This is also something that is normative in the Sharia. It's something that is a structure that actually is supposed to teach us what relationships should look like. Husbands and wives should not just be like all up in each other's business every single second of every single day, right? In traditional societies, that there were separate spaces for women, okay, where women hung out with other women. You had their moms and their aunts and their cousins and their friends and their neighbors, and the guys were out with the other guys. You had the man space, you had the woman space, and we found fulfillment and satisfaction and development through those spaces, okay? The modern arrangement and configuration of doing things is just one way, and it's killing us. It's actually breaking us up and fragmenting us up. So, if we look to the Sharia, this is explorational. This is tentative. But what we need, all the bright thinkers in the room, we need people to think very particularly and targetedly and with a mind towards solutions as to how the Sharia teaches us how families and society should look like, how to think collectively, how to live collectively, how to depend upon each other, how to be such that as a community, we have all of our bases covered, we have our relationships are satisfactory, we feel understood, we have proper camaraderie from the same sex, our friendships, our mentors. We have mentors, people that are different ages than us, both above and below, and we have balance. That each one of us feels that we're actually placed in a position to succeed rather than fitting uncomfortably in the modern secular configuration of things. And just like the Amish, we want to live life on our terms. We don't want to live life on someone else's terms. We want to actually live the life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted for us. And if that's the case, then we won't have to worry that our third generation will belong to theirs. We can actually hope and pray that their third generation will belong to us. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Such a pleasure.